The notification arrived at 9:47 on a Tuesday evening. Damien Hale was seated in his corner office on the 52nd floor of a glass tower in Midtown Manhattan. The city sprawled beneath him like a circuit board, millions of lights pulsing across the skyline, each one representing someone else's ambition. But Damien didn't see any of it. His eyes were locked on a projection model for a merger worth more than most small nations. Numbers, percentages, forecasts, the language he spoke more fluently than love. His phone buzzed against the mahogany desk. He almost ignored it. He usually did during late sessions, silencing the noise that dared interrupt the machinery of his mind. But this time something pulled his gaze downward. A tagged photo notification. Vivian's name. He swiped it open casually, expecting something forgettable. A quiet dinner plate, maybe a sunset, something from the art retreat she had mentioned before leaving. He hadn't paid close attention when she told him. He rarely did anymore. But the image that filled his screen wasn't quiet. It was deafening. Vivian stood in the center of a lantern-lit courtyard, her head thrown back in laughter, her locks cascading over one bare shoulder. Her hands were stained with paint, cerulean and gold clinging to her fingers like joy made visible. Her linen blouse was untucked, her smile wide, her entire body radiating a kind of aliveness he hadn't seen on her in years. She wasn't posing for anyone. She wasn't performing elegance. She was simply, breathtakingly free. And then his eyes drifted to the figure beside her. A man, leaning toward her canvas, his sleeves rolled to the elbows, paint marks on his forearms, his expression soft and admiring, or something worse. He was close, too close. The angle between them was ambiguous. The proximity was not. Damien's breath stopped. His grip tightened around the phone until the case groaned under the pressure. His knuckles paled to white. He zoomed in. Her smile, the man's face, the way her body leaned slightly, naturally, comfortably, as though she had been laughing for hours. A single word escaped his lips, whispered into the silence of his 52nd floor empire. Friends, let me stop here for a moment. Because what you just witnessed, that fracture, that's not a billionaire having a bad night. That's a man staring at proof that his wife's brightest smile has nothing to do with him. And I need to ask you something. Have you ever poured everything into providing, the career, the house, the lifestyle, only to look up one day and realize that the person you love most doesn't need any of it? That what they needed all along was the one thing you never gave, yourself? This is the story of a man who had everything the world envies and almost lost the only thing that truly mattered. His name was Damien Hale. He built $1 billion tech empire from the ground up. Magazines called him a visionary. Competitors feared his name. Investors trusted him with fortunes. He could buy anything on this earth. But on this night, staring at a single photograph on his phone, he realized the one thing his money could never purchase: his wife's happiness. What he does next will test his pride, shatter his ego, and force him to confront a terrifying question: is it too late? If you believe love matters more than wealth, drop a heart in the comments right now. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and tap the bell, because stories like this one are what Infinite Love Tales by Mr. White is all about. Now let me take you back to where it all began. The Hale penthouse sat 34 floors above the Upper East Side of Manhattan. It occupied the entire top level of a limestone building that had once housed oil barons and railroad kings. From the wraparound terrace, you could see Central Park stretching northward like a green scar through concrete. And at night, the city transformed into a galaxy laid flat, shimmering, infinite, untouchable. Inside, every surface gleamed. The floating staircase was carved from white oak and brushed steel. A gallery wall displayed curated art from 3 continents. The kitchen, all Calcutta marble and custom cabinetry, had been designed by an architect who usually built restaurants for Michelin-starred chefs. The dining table, a 12-seat slab of reclaimed walnut imported from a monastery in Tuscany, anchored the open living space like an altar. It was a home that made guests gasp, a home that made photographers linger, a home that belonged in the pages of magazines. And every single morning, Vivian Hale descended the floating staircase to find a single place setting at that 12-seat table. She would sit alone. The private chef had already left breakfast warming under silver covers. Poached eggs, fresh fruit, coffee brewed to her specification. Everything perfect, everything hollow. 7 years earlier, Damien had brought her here blindfolded. She remembered his hands over her eyes, his laughter vibrating against her back as he guided her through the front door. When he pulled his fingers away and she saw the space, the windows, the terrace, the gallery wall already hung with her favorite prints, she had wept. Not from the luxury, from the love behind it. She believed every curated detail meant he truly saw her. That this home was proof he paid attention to who she was, what she cherished, what made her soul sing. Now she understood. He had hired a designer. The designer had asked her preferences in a questionnaire. Damien had signed the check. The penthouse was breathtaking, but beauty without presence is just decoration, and Vivian had become the most exquisite piece of decor in a home no one truly lived in. She would sometimes stand before the mirror in their bedroom and study her reflection. At 36, she was striking, high cheekbones that caught the light, dark eyes that carried a depth most people never paused long enough to notice, skin that glowed even without the careful routines she'd abandoned months ago. But somewhere along the years, the woman staring back had become a stranger. Not because she looked different, because she looked empty, as though the version of herself who once painted until dawn, who laughed in open markets, who danced barefoot in their first apartment, had been locked away behind all this glass and marble. She wasn't angry. Anger required energy she no longer had for a man who wasn't there to receive it. What she felt was something worse than anger. She felt erased. Neglect never arrives like a storm. It doesn't kick down the door announcing itself. It arrives like fog, so slowly, so softly, that you don't realize it's settled until you can't see the person standing right in front of you. For Vivian, it started with the small things. A dinner Damien promised to attend but missed because a client meeting ran long. An anniversary he remembered 3 days late, covering the lapse with an extravagant delivery of roses that arrived while she sat in the bath, crying quietly. A night when he swore he'd be home by 8. She set the table for 2, lit candles, wore the deep burgundy dress he once told her drove him crazy. She waited. 8 became 9. 9 became 10. 10 became 11. At midnight, she blew out the candles and ate alone, watching the wax pool across the tablecloth like tears hardening into something permanent. He came home at 1:15. He didn't notice the wax. Didn't notice the second plate, untouched and cold. Didn't notice the dress. He kissed her forehead absently, the way you might pat a piece of furniture as you walk past, and collapsed into bed with his phone still glowing in his hand. At first, Vivian forgave these lapses. She told herself he was building their future, that all the late nights and missed moments were sacrifices made for their shared life. She defended him to herself, constructed excuses on his behalf, filled the silences with her own rationalizations. But slowly, those small absences became patterns, and patterns calcified into distance, and distance left untreated became a chasm she could no longer shout across. The grand staircase, the marble floors, the shimmering view of Manhattan, none of it filled the silence when he failed to ask about her day. The designer gowns in her closet did not comfort her when she slipped into bed alone. Even the photographs of them smiling, framed on the gallery wall, had begun to feel like mockery, evidence of a love that once existed, preserved behind glass, untouchable and gone. I didn't lose myself all at once, she thought one night, staring at the cooler side of the bed where his body should have been. I gave myself away in pieces, waiting for him to notice what was disappearing. He never did. Before the penthouse, before the empire, before the world knew her as Mrs. Damien Hale, Vivian had been someone else entirely, someone raw, unfinished, and magnificently alive. In her 20s, she attended a small art school in Brooklyn, the kind of place where paint clung to every surface and turpentine hung in the air like perfume. Her studio was a cramped corner of a shared loft, canvases stacked 3 deep against the walls, brushes crammed into mason jars, a folding table splattered with every color she'd ever mixed. She painted portraits of strangers on the subway. She sold small pieces at weekend markets in Williamsburg, her laughter ringing out as she haggled with buyers over prices she secretly thought were too high for her own work. She was fearless in a way that had nothing to do with courage and everything to do with not yet knowing the weight of the world. She danced at block parties. She argued about art theory in dive bars. She stayed up until 4 in the morning because a color on the canvas wasn't quite right, and sleep could wait but the painting could not. That was the woman Damien fell in love with, not the polished wife, not the elegant hostess. The woman with paint under her fingernails who kissed him for the first time on a fire escape in Bushwick, while sirens wailed below and the skyline burned orange behind them. He once told her, lying in that cramped first apartment with their legs tangled together and Takeout cartons on the nightstand. You make the world more colorful just by existing. She believed him. But somewhere between the first million and the first 100 million, that woman was archived. Vivian hadn't touched a canvas in 3 years. Her brushes sat boxed in a closet she didn't open, buried behind handbags that cost more than her old studio's monthly rent. The art school girl had been replaced by Mrs. Hale, the CEO's wife, the woman expected to look flawless at galas and smile for photographers and pretend that the emptiness inside her was just the quiet contentment of a woman who had everything. She had everything, and she had never felt more hollow. The call came on a rainy Wednesday. Margot's voice burst through the speaker before Vivian even said hello, warm, insistent, carrying the force of a woman who refused to watch her best friend vanish. "Pack your brushes," Margot said. "I found an artist's residency in Savannah. 10 days, Viv. No galas, no pretending. Just you, paint, and air that actually smells like something alive." Vivian leaned against the kitchen counter, her coffee untouched and cooling. Through the window, Manhattan's skyline looked like a row of tombstones against the gray sky. "I haven't painted in 3 years, Margot." "Exactly. That's the problem. You buried that part of yourself for a man who doesn't even notice when you're in the room." Margot's voice softened, but didn't lose its edge. "Come with me. Remember who you are. Remember who you are." The words sank into Vivian like a stone dropped into still water. She closed her eyes. Behind her lid she saw the old studio, the turpentine, the stacked canvases, the feeling of a loaded brush meeting blank surface, the feeling of creating something from nothing. That woman hadn't needed a penthouse to feel alive. She had needed only color and courage. "Yes," Vivian whispered. Margot's squeal rang through the phone like church bells. "That's my girl. We leave in 2 weeks. Pack something you don't mind ruining." 2 weeks later, the morning of her departure, Vivian found Damien at the kitchen island. His eyes tracked across his tablet, scrolling market data with the relentless efficiency of a machine. His espresso steamed beside him. He hadn't looked up when she entered the room. "I'm leaving for the retreat today," she said. She measured her voice carefully, not pleading, not cold, just present, hoping he might be too. "Savannah. 10 days. His thumb swiped right, then left, then right again. "Sounds nice. Use the black card." 3 words. No curiosity, no hesitation, no flicker behind his eyes. He didn't ask when she was leaving, who she was going with, whether she would be safe. "No, I'll miss you." Not even a pause in his scrolling. Vivian stood there for a moment longer than she should have. She was waiting, hoping, for him to look up, to catch the longing in her eyes, to say something, anything, that proved she still existed in his world. He swiped to the next page of data. She set down her mug, swallowed the tightness climbing her throat, and walked away. Something inside her sealed shut in that moment. A door she had held open for 7 years, patiently, loyally, painfully, finally, quietly, closed. Savannah wrapped around Vivian like a warm hand, pulling her back to life. The air was thick with magnolia and river salt, the streets canopied by live oaks draped in Spanish moss that swayed like curtains in a breeze that carried music from somewhere she couldn't see. The light was different here, golden, unhurried, generous in a way Manhattan's sharp angles never allowed. The residency was housed in a converted cotton warehouse near Forsyth Park. Exposed brick walls, wide skylights that poured natural light onto paint-spattered wooden floors. The space smelled like linseed oil and old wood, and something Vivian could only describe as creation. Other artists moved through the studios, a ceramicist from Austin, a sculptor from Montreal, a printmaker from Lagos, their energy open and unpretentious. No one asked who her husband was. No one cared about her last name. They asked what she painted and why. The first time she picked up a brush, her hand trembled. 3 years of silence had stiffened something inside her, a muscle atrophied from disuse, a voice gone hoarse from not speaking. She stared at the blank canvas, terrified that the woman who once painted until dawn no longer existed. Margot stood beside her and squeezed her shoulder. "Just begin." So she did. She pressed cerulean to the surface and watched it bleed across the white like a held breath finally released. Then gold, then crimson. Each stroke cracked something open. The colors weren't planned. They poured out of her like water breaking through a dam, messy, urgent, unstoppable. By the end of the first afternoon, tears streaked her cheeks. But she was smiling, the kind of smile that starts in the chest and rises before you can catch it. Over the next days, Vivian transformed. She painted until her arms ached, and her back screamed, and her fingernails were ringed with pigment she didn't bother to clean. She laughed, loudly, freely, the unguarded belly laughs she had forgotten she was capable of. She ate dinner surrounded by people who talked about color theory and childhood memories and the strange ache of making something beautiful out of pain. The other artists noticed her, not because she was the wife of a famous CEO, but because her energy was magnetic. A woman rediscovering herself in real time, pouring years of silence onto canvas with an urgency that made people stop mid-sentence and watch. One evening, standing on the residency's rooftop as the Savannah River caught the last light, Margot leaned close and whispered, "See, you don't need a penthouse to feel alive. Look at you. You're radiant." Vivian smiled into her glass. "I almost forgot what this feels like." "Don't forget again," Margot said firmly. This joy, this fire, it belongs to you. It always did." For the first time in years, Vivian felt seen, even if only by herself. The courtyard was alive on the fifth night. Lanterns hung from the oak branches, casting amber light across the cobblestones. Wine flowed. Music drifted from a speaker nestled in the corner. The air was warm and heavy, carrying the scent of jasmine and the distant sound of the river. Vivian stood before her latest piece, an abstract explosion of blues and golds that seemed to breathe on the canvas. She studied it with her head tilted, paint still drying on her fingers, cerulean smudged along her jaw where she had absently touched her face. A fellow artist wandered over. Raphael, a muralist from Havana with quiet eyes and paint-stained fingers that mirrored hers. He was soft-spoken, respectful, the kind of person who studied art the way some people study scripture, with reverence. He stood beside her canvas for a long moment, his expression one of genuine admiration. "This is extraordinary," he said finally. "You paint like someone who has been holding their breath for a very long time and finally exhaled." Vivian laughed. A full, unguarded sound that startled even her. It came from somewhere deep, somewhere untouched, a place she hadn't visited in years. "That's probably the most accurate thing anyone has ever said to me." They talked for a few minutes, about technique, about color, about the strange courage required to put your inner world on display for strangers. Then Raphael smiled, dipped his head in a slight bow, and drifted toward another group of artists, his attention already elsewhere. But in that moment, Vivian mid-laugh, her locks loose, her hands vivid with pigment, the lantern light catching the warmth of her skin, Margot lifted her phone. Click. The image captured Vivian at her brightest, her laughter unguarded, her eyes sparkling, her linen blouse wind-caught and imperfect. Raphael lingered at the edge of the frame, leaning toward the canvas with a faint, respectful smile. Margot studied the screen and gasped softly. "Girl," she whispered, "you look like pure joy." "This is the one." Vivian looked at the image and didn't recognize herself. Not because she looked different, but because she looked like the woman she used to be. The woman before the penthouse. Before the silence. The photo went up within the hour. Comments flooded in, glowing, radiant. The real you. Friends who hadn't seen her smile like that in years suddenly saw her, not as Mrs. Hale but as Vivian, alive, on fire, free. She smiled at the attention, savoring the warmth. But she didn't know, couldn't have known, that 1,200 miles north, in a glass tower above Manhattan, Damien Hale was staring at the same photograph, and his reaction would be anything but warm. Friends, I need to pause here, because what's about to happen isn't just about Damien. It's about every one of us who has ever taken someone's presence for granted. How many of us have poured ourselves into work, into ambition, into the grind of surviving, only to look up one day and realize the person we love most has learned to shine without us? That their brightest moments have nothing to do with us anymore? If this story is hitting home right now, I need you to drop a comment below. Tell me, have you ever been the one neglected or the one who neglected? I read every single comment, and I want to hear your story. And if you're finding value in this, smash that like button. It tells the algorithm to share this story with someone who might need to hear it. Now, what Damien does next will either save his marriage or destroy it entirely. Stay with me. The phone nearly slipped from his grip. Damien enlarged the image and studied every pixel. Her laugh, when had she last laughed like that with him? Her hands, stained with cerulean and gold, the hands he hadn't held in months. And the man. Close, too close. His expression too soft, too admiring, too present. Damien's chest caved. The spreadsheet on his monitor blurred. The conference call scheduled in 8 minutes dissolved into irrelevance. He zoomed in on her face. The joy there wasn't performed. It wasn't the polished, careful smile she wore at his company dinners. This was raw and real and entirely disconnected from him. When was the last time she laughed like that with me? He tried to summon the memory. Failed. All he could see were the late nights, the tired forehead kisses, the mornings where his eyes stayed glued to a screen while she sat across the table in silence. He couldn't recall the last time he looked at her, truly looked at her, the way that stranger in the photo seemed to. Jealousy detonated inside him. Not the dignified, controlled kind he might have expected from a man of his stature. The ragged, gasping kind. The kind that strips away every title and accomplishment and leaves you exposed as nothing more than a man terrified of being replaceable. He paced. 5 steps to the window. 5 steps back. His assistant knocked twice. He didn't answer. The city glittered outside, but he couldn't see it. All he could see was Vivian, luminous, unreachable, laughing in a courtyard 1,000 miles away with a stranger who had done nothing more than notice her. The questions weren't rational, but jealousy never is. Who is he? Does she talk to him every day? Is she happier without me? But beneath the jealousy, a deeper terror clawed upward. What if the photo wasn't about the man at all? What if it was about what the man represented? Presence, attention, the simple act of seeing her. What if she realizes she doesn't need me? He dropped into his chair, pressing both palms against his eyes. For years, Damien had conquered everything placed before him. He feared no competitor, no downturn, no risk. But this fear was different. It dug into his chest, raw and unrelenting. It whispered that no amount of money, no title, no car or penthouse could secure what he had neglected for too long. For the first time in his adult life, the mighty CEO felt something he'd never admitted aloud. Powerless. The days that followed were a slow unraveling. Damien couldn't function. Spreadsheets blurred. Calls went unanswered. His assistants exchanged worried glances, whispering about his distracted air, his curt responses, the way his temper flared at trivial errors. The man who once commanded rooms with surgical precision now stared out of windows like someone searching for something he couldn't name. He scrolled Vivian's profile obsessively. Every new photo from Savannah twisted the blade deeper. Vivian painting in natural light, her face serene. Vivian laughing with Margot at a cafe, wine glasses catching the sun. Vivian sitting alone on a rooftop at dusk, the river behind her, needing nothing and no one. The cruel irony crystallized. She glowed brighter the further she drifted from him. While he, celebrated for composure, admired for control, was spiraling into a kind of insecurity he didn't know existed inside him. He realized, sitting in his darkened office at 2 a.m., that he hadn't been absent in body. His name was still on the lease. His shoes still lined the closet. His side of the bed still bore his shape each morning. He was present in address only. In every way that mattered, emotionally, spiritually, humanly, he had abandoned her, and the fear shifted. It was no longer about losing her to another man. It was about realizing he had pushed her to a place where she might not even want to be found. If she can be that happy without me, he thought, then what have I been to her? A provider? A signature on a bank account? The man who kisses her forehead at midnight and calls it love? The questions burned, because the answers were already there, written in the silence of every missed dinner, every broken promise, every night she blew out candles he never saw. The night Vivian returned from Savannah, she moved through the penthouse with a quietness that unnerved him. She carried a canvas bag over one shoulder, her skin warm from the Georgia sun, her locks smelling faintly of turpentine and magnolia. She looked different, not in feature, in bearing. She carried herself like a woman who had remembered her own name. Damien was waiting in the living room. His jacket was off, his sleeves rolled. A glass of bourbon sat untouched beside him, a prop for hands that had nowhere else to go. He had been sitting there for 2 hours, rehearsing words that dissolved the moment she walked through the door. "You didn't tell me about him," he said, before she set down her bag. His voice was low, edged with something she hadn't heard from him in years. Vivian paused, turned slowly. Her expression was unreadable. About whom? The man in the photo, the one standing next to you, leaning toward you. Her brows lifted, not in surprise, but in something closer to exhaustion. "Raphael. He's a muralist. He complimented my painting and walked away. That's the entire story." But Damien's chest ached with a jealousy that refused to be soothed. He stepped closer, his voice cracking slightly, betraying him. "You looked like you didn't need me, like you didn't even think about me." The words hung heavy and awkward, less like the polished CEO who commanded boardrooms, and more like a man fumbling with emotions he had never learned to name. Vivian set her bag down deliberately. She faced him fully, her dark eyes steady, her voice terrifyingly calm. "Damien, did you call me once while I was gone?" Silence. "Did you send a single message? Ask if I arrived safely, ask what I was painting, ask if I missed you?" More silence. "You didn't," she answered for him. The words were quiet, but each one landed with the weight of a gavel. "But the moment you saw me smiling without you, suddenly you remember I exist. Suddenly you care." She stepped closer. Her heels clicked against the marble with a measured rhythm. "Jealousy isn't love, Damien, it's ego. And I am tired, I am exhausted, of being invisible until your ego feels threatened." He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. The man who had closed billion-dollar deals with smooth speeches, who had convinced investors, disarmed competitors, and swayed entire boardrooms with the force of his words. That man had nothing. Vivian's voice dropped lower, trembling at its edges but never breaking. "I wasn't invisible because of a musician or a photograph. I was invisible because you made me that way. Night after night, you chose spreadsheets over conversations. You chose clients over connection. You chose the empire over the woman standing right in front of you." She paused, her eyes shimmering, though no tears fell. When she spoke again, her words carried the calm finality of someone who had already grieved. "You can't throw jealous words around like a man who's suddenly afraid and call it love. Love is in the effort, it's in showing up, it's in noticing me when there's no photograph to trigger your attention, when there's no audience, when it's just you and me and the silence you filled with nothing for years." Grant stood paralyzed. Every sentence was a surgical incision, opening wounds he had spent years pretending didn't exist. She shook her head slowly. "If you want to fight for this marriage, then fight with presence, fight with consistency. Don't tell me you're afraid to lose me. Show me why I should stay." The echo of that final sentence filled every corner of the room, more deafening than any shouting match, more devastating than any slammed door. Vivian turned and climbed the stairs. Her footsteps were steady. She did not look back. Damien stood alone in the living room, surrounded by a penthouse worth tens of millions of dollars, and felt the full, crushing weight of his own poverty. He didn't sleep that night, not a minute. He sat in the dark living room, her words circling his mind like birds that refused to land. "Show me why I should stay." For years, promises had been his currency. He closed deals on the strength of what he said, the conviction in his voice, the elegant way he assembled language into persuasion. But Vivian wasn't an investor. She wasn't a client. She was the woman who had loved him before the money, before the title, before the world decided he mattered. And she was telling him, clearly and without malice, that his words were bankrupt. He thought about the candles, the wax pooled on the tablecloth that he never noticed, the burgundy dress she wore for him that he never saw, the 12-seat table with one place setting, the phone calls he never made while she was in Savannah. Not a single one. He had been absent, not in body. His name was on the mailbox, his shoes in the closet. But in every way that mattered, he had left her alone in a mansion full of beautiful, meaningless things. "I can't buy my way out of this," he realized. "I can't charm my way out. I can't negotiate." For the first time in his marriage, Damien understood that the only path forward required something he had never given Vivian consistently: himself. The next morning, Vivian woke to an unfamiliar sound, clattering from the hallway. She rubbed her eyes. For years, mornings in the penthouse had followed the same hollow rhythm, Damien already gone. Coffee lukewarm on the counter, silence humming through every room. But today, the bedroom door nudged open, and there he stood. Damien, barefoot, hair uncombed, awkwardly balancing a tray. On it sat a plate of scrambled eggs, slightly overcooked. Toast that. Was a shade past golden, a bowl of fresh fruit, and coffee with both cream and sugar on the side because he couldn't remember which she preferred. He cleared his throat. I didn't burn anything. At least I don't think I did." Vivian sat up slowly, stunned. For a man who could negotiate mergers without breaking a sweat, he looked uncharacteristically terrified holding a breakfast tray. "You cooked?" she asked, one eyebrow rising. "Cooked is generous," he admitted, setting the tray carefully on her lap. "Let's just say I watched a tutorial. Twice. And called Margot once to ask how you take your coffee. She laughed at me for a full minute. The honesty in his tone tugged at something inside her. She couldn't remember the last time he had done something this small, this imperfect, this thoughtful, without an audience, without a photographer, without anything to gain except her attention. She lifted the fork and took a bite. The eggs were bland. The toast crunched too loudly. But the imperfection was the point. "Not terrible," she said softly. And a ghost of a smile crossed her lips. Relief washed over his face, raw, unguarded relief that belonged to a man, not a CEO. He didn't rush away. Instead, he sat at the edge of the bed, his posture unsure, and asked her about Savannah. Not in passing. With genuine curiosity, he asked what she painted, what colors she chose, what the air smelled like, what made her laugh. And Vivian, though cautious, found herself answering. She described the courtyard, the lanterns, the feeling of cerulean on canvas after 3 years of silence. She told him about the rooftop at dusk, the river catching the last light, the strange sensation of meeting herself again. Damien listened, truly listened. No phone, no glances at a screen, no distracted nod. Just his eyes on hers, absorbing every word like a man trying to relearn a language he had forgotten. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't forgiveness. But sometimes the smallest steps carry the greatest meaning. 2 weeks later, Vivian mentioned dinner at her mother's home in Harlem. She said it casually, almost as an afterthought, the way she had learned to mention family events without expectation, braced for the familiar refusal. "I'll go," Damien said. She blinked. "You'll go?" He nodded, yes. It's overdue. The truth was, it terrified him. Damien came from a world of quiet tables, polished silverware, and conversations about market valuations. Vivian's family was different, vibrant, communal, warm in a way that left no room for pretense. He knew he would be out of his element. But maybe that was the point. When they pulled up, the house was already buzzing. Music spilled from open windows. The smell of jollof rice and fried plantains drifted into the street. Kids chased each other across the front yard. Neighbors arrived with aluminum trays of extra dishes, calling greetings across the porch. Inside, the table overflowed. Vivian's family greeted her with open arms, hugs, exclamations, compliments on her hair, questions about Savannah. When their eyes landed on Damien, the energy shifted. Her brother, Kwame, leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Look who decided to show up." Damien extended his hand. "Good to see you, Kwame." Kwame shook it firmly. "We'll see." But instead of retreating behind polite distance, Damien leaned in. He laughed when her uncle cracked jokes. He listened when her mother shared family memories. He asked questions about recipes when her aunt insisted he try everything on the table. He passed dishes. He complimented flavors. He admitted he had never tasted plantains cooked this way before. Her grandmother, seated in her favorite armchair like a queen on a throne, studied him with sharp, unflinching eyes. "So, Damien," she said, her voice slow but carrying the authority of decades, "are you finally going to treat my granddaughter right, or are we wasting this good food on you?" The room chuckled, but the weight of the question was unmistakable. Damien didn't flinch. He leaned forward, meeting her gaze with a humility he rarely showed to anyone. "I've failed her," he said simply, "but I'm trying to do better, and I'll keep trying until I get it right." The room went quiet. Even Kwame's skeptical expression softened a fraction. Then her grandmother nodded slowly, a faint smile pulling at the corner of her lips. "Good answer. Now eat." Laughter erupted, warm and forgiving. And for the first time in years, the divide between Damien's world and Vivian's began to narrow. Just a little. Later that night, driving back through the city's glowing arteries, the silence between them was different. Not the suffocating absence she had grown accustomed to. Something gentler. Damien spoke first. "Tonight was different. Your family welcomed me more than I deserved." "They welcomed you because you showed up," Vivian replied, her voice thoughtful. "That's all they've ever wanted. That's all I've ever wanted. For you to show up." He nodded slowly, his jaw tightening. When they arrived home, he didn't retreat to his office, didn't open his laptop. He stood in the living room, the same room where her words had shattered him, and said, "I've learned something. Love doesn't thrive on pride. It doesn't survive on status. It only lives when there's humility, when you're willing to admit you're wrong and start small." Tonight taught me that. Vivian studied his face, searching for cracks in his sincerity, finding, for the first time, none. Humility is where love begins, Damien, she said softly. Without it, all the rest, money, power, success, means nothing. The weeks that followed were not a restoration. They were an excavation, slow, uncertain, sometimes painful. Damien canceled meetings. He came home before dark. He sat beside her on the terrace and asked about her art, not with hollow politeness, but with the clumsy, earnest curiosity of a man learning to see his wife for the first time in years. He wasn't perfect. Some nights, old habits pulled at him. The gravitational force of a phone buzzing, an email marked urgent, the muscle memory of choosing work over presence. But each time, he caught himself, set the phone face down, turned back to her, stayed, and Vivian watched, cautiously, guarding the fragile, flickering thing inside her that wanted to believe. She wasn't ready to surrender her heart completely. The scars of neglect don't heal on the timeline of the person who inflicted them. But she noticed the effort. The breakfasts, the questions, the way he started saying her name like it meant something again. Then came the evening that changed everything. On a Friday night, Damien drove her to a small gallery in Chelsea. He said nothing about where they were going, only that she should wear something she loved. When they walked through the entrance, Vivian stopped breathing. Her paintings, the ones from Savannah, every canvas, the cerulean and gold explosions, the abstract landscapes, the raw, trembling self-portraits of a woman coming back to life, mounted on white walls under gallery lighting. Each one framed, labeled, illuminated with the care reserved for masterpieces. Vivian pressed her hand to her mouth. Tears spilled before she could stop them. "You did this?" she whispered. Damien stood beside her, his hands in his pockets, his eyes bright with something she hadn't seen in years. "No," he said quietly. "You did this. I just made sure the world could see it." She turned to him, truly looked at him, and for the first time in years she saw not the CEO, not the absent husband, not the man who traded her heart for spreadsheets. She saw the man who had once laid beside her in a tiny apartment and told her she made the world more colorful just by existing. He wasn't fully that man yet. Perhaps he never would be again in exactly the same way. But he was trying, imperfectly, clumsily, with overcooked eggs and fumbling words and a humility that looked foreign on him but grew more genuine each day. She reached for his hand. His fingers closed around hers, trembling. "Don't let go again," she said. "Never," he whispered, and for the first time, the promise didn't feel empty. It felt like a beginning. That night, driving home through the electric glow of the city, the silence between them was different from any silence they had shared before. It wasn't the cold void that had haunted their marriage. It wasn't the tense quiet of unspoken accusations. It was the stillness that follows a storm, fragile, clean, full of possibility. Vivian's eyes were closed, a faint smile resting on her lips, her paint-stained fingers still laced through his. And Damien glanced at her, the woman who had been there all along, waiting for him to simply see her, and felt a truth settle into his chest with the weight of something permanent. True power was never measured in empires built. It was never calculated in stock prices or net worth or the size of the rooms you slept in. True power was measured in the courage to kneel before the person you love and say, "I see you now, and I will not look away again." Friends, let me leave you with this. This story was never about a photograph. It was never about jealousy or wealth or a man in the background of a picture. It was about presence, about the quiet devastation that happens when we give the world our best energy and leave the people we love with our leftovers. Wealth can build penthouses, but only presence builds a home. And love, real love, isn't measured in what you provide. It's measured in how you show up, not on your best day, not when you're afraid, every single day. Damien Hale learned that lesson the hard way. He almost lost the most extraordinary woman in his life, not to another man, but to his own blindness. And the thing that saved him wasn't his money, his intelligence, or his power. It was the most difficult thing he ever did, admitting he was wrong and starting small. Overcooked eggs, a listened story, a hand held without letting go. Sometimes the smallest steps carry the greatest meaning. Now, I need you to do 3 things for me. First, hit that like button. It tells the algorithm this story matters and deserves to reach someone who needs to hear it. Second, drop a comment below. What is the most important lesson you're taking from Damien and Vivian's story? I read every single comment, and your words might be exactly what another viewer needs to hear tonight. Third, if you're not yet subscribed to Infinite Love Tales by Mr. White, now is the time. Hit subscribe and tap that notification bell so you never miss a story that could change the way you see love, life, and what truly matters. Thank you for being part of this family. Until next time, love louder, show up fully, and never let the people you love become invisible.